lets me seek his face, believe his word, and trust his grace. I'll cast on him my every care and wait for the sweet hour of prayer. Be seated. Our scripture this morning comes from Matthew's Gospel. Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 16. You are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything, but it is thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under a bushel basket, but on top of a lampstand. And it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. This is the word of God for us, the people of God. Thanks be to God. Well, this morning our attention is drawn to a hillside on the northern shore of Galilee, not too far from Capernaum. Matthew says that news about Jesus' teaching and news about Jesus' healing has traveled all throughout Palestine. People have come from great distances to hear this miracle worker. So very near Capernaum, most scholars say, the crowd got really big. And Jesus would climb up a hillside. And there he began to teach. That sermon, that group of teaching, is found in Matthew 5, 6, and 7. It's known as the Sermon on the Mount. In this passage of the gospel, Jesus gives some of the most important words and instructions and teachings about how we are to live with one another, about how we are to conduct ourselves, about how we can, in our own lives, reflect God's will and God's heart. You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hid, Jesus says. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under a bushel basket. No, they put it on the lampstand. And in the same way, you are to shine in the world so everybody will see you belong to God and they will glorify God. You are the salt of the earth, Jesus says. But if salt isn't as pure, as salty as it once was, what good is it? Well, we just put it on the sidewalk in winter. And what do people do? They walk on it. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. You know what intrigues me the most about this text? It's what Jesus didn't say. Jesus didn't say, one day you will become the salt of the earth. But only after you've been my disciple, only after you've been baptized, only after you've joined a support group, only after you've been training. No, that's not what Jesus said. He said, you are the salt of the earth. Jesus did not say, I have something I want you to consider. I want you to consider becoming the salt of the earth. I want you to consider becoming the light of the world. I'll give you all the demands. I want you to think about it. And if you're interested, see me after I finish the sermon. Jesus didn't say that. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Jesus also didn't say, now as I look at this vast number of people, I have a sneaky suspicion some of you will be the salt of the earth. No, Jesus' words were bold. Jesus' words were courageous. Jesus' words were inclusive. Why would he say such a thing to such a group of people? I think he did it for two reasons. First of all, I think he wanted to build up their self-esteem. The people Jesus is talking to, these people had been oppressed all of their life. It had taken a toll on them. These people were viewed by Rome as slaves. They were treated and they were considered to be less than. They were the people that even the religious leaders, their own religious leaders, would pass over for the rich and for the wealthy and for those with influence. Nobody cared what they thought. Nobody ever asked their opinion. When the decisions were made, they never had a place at the table. And now on this hillside, Jesus has the audacity to look at this group of people and to say to them, you. The word you is plural. All of you. Nobody is left out. You. And if Jesus had been a southerner, he would have said y'all are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. It's not something that you will obtain one day. He said you are. That's present. In this sermon, Jesus is talking about today. He's talking to a group of oppressed people who nobody cares about, and he's telling them that they are some of the most precious things in the world when it comes to God. Because nobody there ever doubted the use of salt or light. They knew all about it. In this day and in this time, salt was one of the most important things you could have. Soldiers many times were even paid with salt. In fact, we get the word salary and the word sale, S-A-L-E, from the same root word as we get the word salt. You may have heard the phrase, that person is not worth their salt. Salt was used as a preservative. They didn't have refrigerators. They couldn't just put something in the refrigerator to keep it cool. Salt was used as a seasoning. And salt was even used to cleanse and purify things. Many of you probably have had a wound at some time on your skin, and you had a well-meaning parent take some Epsom salts and put it on it. And you know it stings, and you know it hurts, but you also know it helps. And light was so important to them. They didn't have chandeliers. In fact, the average Palestinian household at this time was built a one-room shack with just a tiny little space, tiny little window cut in. It would let some heat in, and it would let just a little light in. But if you wanted to see much, you had to light a candle. They all knew how important salt was. And they all knew how important light was. And Jesus looks at these folks that society does not care about. These folks that nobody has ever expressed any interest in. And he says, you, all of you, are as important to God as salt and light. I can only imagine those people that day as they heard Jesus say this. I have a feeling they looked around, first of all, puzzled. Can you believe he's saying that to us? Can you believe he's saying we matter? Nobody had ever told them that before. And then I think I would have loved to have seen their faces when they realized that they may not matter to the Romans. They may not even matter to their own religious leaders, but they mattered to God. Can't you see the grin on their face when they realized they mattered? That even though the Romans had left them out, even though their own religious folks had left them out, in God's sight, they were not left out. That is one of the things that excites me and draws me to the gospel more than anything else. The exclusiveness. How God is inclusive. How God does not let anyone be thrown to the side. But I think there's another reason that Jesus looked at these folks that day and said, you are the salt of the world, of the earth. You are the light of the world. I think he was inviting them. He was inviting them to join God's plan to change the world. To change the world. Just as Jesus had brought hope, and just as Jesus had brought healing to the people he met, now Jesus was saying to them, you go and do the same. You go, and everywhere you go, everyone you meet, I want you to change their world. I want you to bring hope to their world. I want you to bring healing to their world. Because you see, every one of them there could do something. Every one of them there could lift people's spirits. Every one of them could help someone carry their burden. Each person in that crowd could feed someone. Each person in that crowd could clothe someone. Each person in that crowd could go visit someone. Each person in that crowd could walk beside someone who was frightened, someone who was sick. Each person in that crowd could embrace someone who had been considered an outcast. Now, yes, these were stiff challenges. Yes, these would be hard things to do, but one by one, this group could go out and to change the world one person at a time. And if everybody did something, God's light and God's flavoring and God's healing could be felt all around the world. You say, well, I can't do anything. You can do something. We've already had examples of salt and light this morning. When Marie was playing the prelude, she was lighting up the sanctuary. When she went to the organ and Jerry came up, they were both lighting the sanctuary. Peggy leading the hymn, that was salt, that was light. Amy doing the announcements and praying, salt and light. Eli gave us a great example. I can only imagine the light that God saw when he professed and followed in baptism. And you can do something. No, you can't do everything, but you can do something. And God was looking down on Jesus as Jesus was preaching that day. And I can only imagine God was saying, yes, listen, folks, I have a call for you, and nobody is to be left out. Jesus was sending them on a mission to go change the world And I have to think that they went out and gave it their best shot, because they didn't need anyone's permission to be kind and compassionate and courageous and bold. And they did not need to wait till another time to begin that journey. I love the saying, if not me, then who? And if not now, then when? That's what Jesus is saying to these people. Now I wonder, who has been salt and light in your world? Who has made visible for you and led you out of the darkness into light? Who has brought the best out in you? I hope you let them know. That sure would change their world. And I hope now you will do the same thing for someone else. James Brewer Calvert, a Disciples of Christ pastor, grew up in New York City. He grew up at the corner of 3rd Avenue and 104th Street. He was 15 years old, he said. He remembers waking up on a rainy Saturday morning. He looked out his window at the street below, and it had rained so much that some of the drains, in fact, many of the drains, had become clogged. And he looked out that window, and the water was just piling up. And the water was in the streets, and the water was even getting on the sidewalk. And he said to himself, this is a mess. Somebody ought to go do something about it. And just then he noticed two people. They were barefoot. They had their pants rolled up to their knees. And they were going to one drain after another, getting the debris out, opening the drain so that the water could go through it. He said he looked a little bit closer. And when he did, he noticed it was his mom and it was his dad. He said at that moment, 15 years old, he looked out of his window and he thought, you know, the person that ought to do something about this mess includes me. He said that was a salt and light moment for him. Who's going to be looking out their window at you this week? Who's going to be watching you this week? You got a chance to be salt and light. Let's face it, this world is in a mess. Somebody ought to do something about it. Is that someone going to be you?